with the new Act, Nigeria's tech ecosystem should see an improved enabling environment in terms of, you know, tech startups, because they face a number of challenges having to do with funding and, you know, backup, you know, and a lot of that. So we have a startup advocate in the studio, Luna Bauer. You're welcome.
Yes, thank you for having me.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm very good, thank you.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Glad to know that we have a tech advocate in the studio today, because we usually always come about human rights advocates, you know, gender advocates, but having a tech advocate is, you know, is something really refreshing to know. Now that this startup bill is now an act, what is it for the techies and the technology industry?
Okay, so thank you for having me once more. The Startup Act is a very major win for the whole space as a whole. I don't think it will be proper for me to talk about the act without looking at historical timeline. You know, it wasn't just an event that happened overnight. You know, the first instance of the usage of a computer was recorded sometime in 1963, somewhere in Ibadan, University of Ibadan to be precise, where IBM did set up a shop for talents to be trained across the continent. You know, and you can follow that up till about 1970, in the 70s, when computer science was introduced in the university system, in our curriculums. And then down to 2001, when I think it was Chika who tried to pitch to MTN then to bring email and websites to mobile phones for MTN subscribers. And he struggled to find tech talent, developers to build that solution. Somewhere along the line, he was able to find, he came across one, Godwill. Was it Godwill? I think so. But, you know, when you follow those antecedents, you can see how we've developed over time. It was in the same 2001 that the likes of AppTech and NIIT came into the space and started training a lot of software engineers. Then we have CC Hub, who came in and, you know, started incubating a lot of ideas. And from there till then, the tech ecosystem has grown. Nigeria has the highest number of unicorn, from the likes of InterSwitch to Flutterwave and so on and so forth. So this act is more or less an enabling, it's going to create an enabling environment where high impact or high growth startups would be able to meet their potentials in full. And it is a win-win situation for both the techies, ecosystem developers, and the government itself. I mean, it would be quite unreasonable for any government to not recognize that there is a substantial amount of or a particular demographic of users who attract a substantial amount of our foreign exchange into the country. I mean, if you look at the kind of payment or salary that techies command from the international community, only second to perhaps the oil and gas industry. So it's a very, very major step. And I want to say congratulations to everybody who has played a major role or a critical role towards making sure that this happened. Let me also state here that it was a tent approach. That means a lot of stakeholders played a critical role towards bringing this bill to life. It wasn't just a government thing. In fact, if you look at those on the Presidential Advisory Board that actually drove this bill to this logical conclusion, you can say that 90% of them are from the industry itself, you know. So congratulations to everyone. Congratulations to Nigeria.
Congratulations indeed. Now, we have so many bills, piece of legislation in the country.
Yes.
No doubt. Probably this is the first in the technology industrial sector. But the fear is, will it live to its expectation? knowing full well that we know the Nigeria syndrome, we have issues, loopholes here and there. Yeah, it's to create that enabling environment. But what are your fears?
Okay, so if you look at the Act itself, I would like to summarize it with three critical components.
Yeah.
You know, first, it's not just a legal framework. It is a legal framework, definitely, but it is much more than that, because there is the ecosystem development component of the Act, and then there is also the financing component of the Act. Let me add here that I'm also an entrepreneur myself.
Okay.
You know, so this Act is very critical in the sense that from the legal framework, which now is a bold statement from the Nigerian government saying that, yes, I mean, there's no better insurance or acknowledgement that you can get than your constitution to say, yes, we recognize what these people have been doing all alone, all this while. And we're coming in. I mean, it's what we've been advocating for. The government should come in and take its role by driving the whole industry to where it needs to get to. You know, we did the same thing in the entertainment industry. I remember very well when the government said airplay should be given more to Nigerian music. And we've seen where that has taken us to. The music industry or the entertainment industry is one of our biggest exports today. You know, literally when you go on YouTube today, you see foreigners going to try Nigerian dishes. You know, you see, everybody knows what Afrobeat is today. It's now you know, has its own genre in the global entertainment scene. We are going to see the same thing happening here. Let me say that the Act is meant to streamline all of those issues that you've raised, from policy somersault to policy inconsistencies to stiffing regulations that we've struggled with, you know, to issues around multiple taxations, all of these things. You know, so if you look at the Act, it says that a council will be set up. It also says that there will be a startup portal where startups will not have to deal directly with some of the agencies or parastatals that there are. For example, I don't have to deal with the issue of submission to CAC or to deal with the issue of registering my IP with Ministry of Trade and Investment, where you can only do it in Abuja. So imagine what startups have to go through across the country just to get their IP registered. They say you can go to a portal and do it, but when you go online, it's not working. You're forced to go to an office somewhere, meet with a civil servant somewhere, and then, you know, the back and forth and all of these things. So this Act is going to streamline all of these things. I love to use the word sandwich, you know, look at these inconsistencies and deal with them. And then there's the issue, there's the component that talks about labeling of startups. Yeah. That component is going to provide, you know, so there are incentives that whether you are a startup or not, or a small and medium scale enterprise, you can benefit from, tax incentives and all of that. But the startup labeling is going to, you know, provide more, do more in that regard for startups. So it's going to look at high impact and high growth startups and look at how it's going to help them grow more, do more, you know. And then the last component, which has to do with financing, which is going to be managed by, I think, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Fund. You know, so that is an endorsement for the government to say that, look, we're going to provide seed funding for the startups. I mean, just watch investors run into the country and open up shops. You know, we call Israel today the startup nation. Why? Yeah. Because of the critical role that the government played. You know, maybe now we can see this whole thing trickle down, even further down to our high institutions. I hope to see our high institutions become incubators themselves, you know, become technology hub or parks where some of these talents or technical skill sets can actually be groomed and developed.
Okay, so I'd love us to break this down to startups who do not really have the wherewithal, that's the knowledge to know a lot, because I've been privileged to cover the ICT sector for more than 5 years and counting. And then we see, let's say, NCC, NIDA giving award and grants to startups and all that. which means that a lot of applications have been submitted in the past before they now narrow it down to like 10 best startups and everything. Now, a lot of startups have been asking, what's in it for me? The startup bill, I've been getting messages, what's in it for me? And they've been reading about it, but they do not really know how to start, you know. And note that these startups could be taken advantage of,
Yeah.
you know, when there is a new entrant of something like this and you don't really know much about it. Somebody could come and tell you, enter for these, pay these, and then you will get, you know. So for, could you break it down in the layman's language for startups who really want to, you know, you said you're an entrepreneur, startup who wants to commercialize their startup, who wants to really break even, how do they, what is it in for them without, you know, going to a brick and mortar place to do the, you know, registration, like you said?
Yes. So the space is an open ocean, like you said, and definitely there will be people who would jump on this, try to take advantage of young entrepreneurs who are trying to find their footings or, you know, their way around the whole space or ecosystem. Certainly that's going to happen. But I would like to think or look at it from this angle, you know. I very much hope that implementation of this act is going to take effect quite soon, so that we can see, physically see and identify some of the, you know, parks, development parks or tech parks that the Act has set out in its provisions to address. If you look at the concentration of startups, you would say Lagos, you would say perhaps Abuja, Port Harcourt. You know, we've seen a number of others springing up in the likes of Kaduna, Kanu, you know, but it's very much Lagos. You know, the Act is going to enable a wider distribution of these platforms that would enable startups. I think what startups should be doing is that they should look out for those kind of spaces, whether they are going to be in the universities or they are going to be in free trade zones, industrial parks and layouts. They should follow up on the implementation processes that's going to happen. They should also follow up with NITDA, which is the government arm responsible for driving all of these processes, especially the Office of the National Digital Innovation. Very much, they have a lot of programs for startups that I know and I'm aware of. They have a lot of partners that they work with. Some of them, the likes of Amazon, AWS, JICA, quite a number of them, you know. So yes, you can only learn while you're in it. You know, that's the truth about entrepreneurship. You know, if you're a techie, it doesn't automatically make you an entrepreneur. You have to transit from writing codes into the business aspect.
Commercializing it.
Thank you. So, and that is where it all boils down to. I started as a software engineer, you know, before evolving to that level. I don't write codes anymore, but I have people who write codes. You know, so it's a learning process. You know, you're going to make mistakes, and yes, Nigeria is not so forgiving when it comes to mistakes, but mistakes are actually a key component of learning and building and succeeding in the tech space.
So are we seeing Nigeria as the next Silicon Valley in, let's say, 5-10 years to come?
Hopefully we are already. If you look at, you know, the number of, we have the largest number of unicorns already. The likes of Egypt, Tunisia, South Africa are chasing, you know. They are trying to, I would say, you know, the gap isn't much, but looking at our population, the gap should be, you know, quite wide. And I hope that this act is going to drive that whole process. You know, one of the challenges we've had is that, you know, the country, our regulators have found it very difficult to come to terms with, you know, this demographic of people. Tech is driven by young people, you know. And if you look at recent events not so long ago, the issue around NSAS was driven because of, you know, misunderstanding of, you know, our security operatives trying to understand why a 19-year-old kid will be driving a Mercedes-Benz carrying a phone worth over ₦1 million, but they are paid well. You know, someone can be here, and that's why it's very important that the government creates not just the enabling environment for the tech ecosystem, but also infrastructure for young Nigerians to perhaps stay in the country. Because the foreign exchange that will be coming into the country, you know, we have the population to actually export talent without Nigerians necessarily leaving the country. And this is going to be critical for us emerging and becoming a very strong nation, or a startup nation eventually.
From the look of things, it appears it's going to be very lucrative. So I intend to leave journalism to go into startup. Well, that's the lighter note.
Yes.
Let's talk about the investment, the seed for investment. How is the arts going to make provision? What is the investment going to be like when I'm talking about funding?
Yes. Yes, so the startup labeling is going to draft out a series of processes or procedures that would identify high impact or high growth startups. With that, once you meet those criteria, then it means that you would now be eligible for seed funding from the government. So the government is going to be investing in your startup. The government is going to be perhaps the first person who will write you a check after your friends, family, and the founders who, of course, you know, put in their own money into starting up these companies. You know, I remember very well when I started my last venture, my wife actually was one of those people who invested in my startup. Oh. You know, so it's very critical, because when you exhaust funds from these 3 Fs, you know, and there is no investment coming in, mind you, remember that Nigeria already has a very bad reputation. So you can imagine what we struggle to go through just to raise investment. Yes, they say that over 40% of the investment coming to startups in Africa comes to Nigeria. But you can imagine the struggle that we have to go through just to pull these funds in. Now, with the government coming in to say that, look, I'm going to be your seed investor, just imagine the confidence that that's going to send, the message that's going to send to the world. The venture capitalists are watching. Okay. You know, this is a solid signal for the world, and you can expect them to come in. You know, I believe that's going to make things a lot more easy for people. It doesn't mean that it's going to take away all of the challenges. Okay. You can even argue by saying that perhaps the Nigerian startup act is not as ambitious as that of Tunisia, or that of India, or perhaps that of even Kenya. But our Startup Act goes for the jugular. It addresses those fundamental issues that startups face, which is funding. Funding is one of them. Issues around policy somersault and inconsistent regulations are all part of those issues.
And for the funding to be consistent, your company must have existed for how many years?
Well, so, you know, one of the key things or advantages that a startup has is speed. You know, okay. You are expected to execute fast. So we're not conventional like the normal businesses that you have. If you look at the time it took Flutterwave to become a unicorn, barely within 5 years, I think. You know, and there are quite a number of them that are about becoming unicorns right now. You know, though there are other factors that would drive how fast you can execute as a startup. You know, some of them has to do with issues around infrastructure and all of that. So if you're playing in the fintech space, for example, it could be a lot more easier for you compared to someone who is playing in the agri-tech space where there is nothing. You know, the fintech space, the banking sector, over time has created this infrastructure that has made it easy for startups to ride on it, you know, and build quite fast and ship. But in the agri-tech space, you have to literally onboard farmers right from, you know, from nothing. You know, so it's different. We acknowledge that, but you are expected to execute quite fast. So that time that it takes you to execute, you would not necessarily peg a certain number of years. But like somebody would say, there are different school of thoughts to it. Somebody would say that if it takes you more than 3 months to actually build an MVP, then there's no need for you to bother. You're not a startup. You know, but again, it all depends on what you're building. Sometimes it could take you a year. Sometimes the research work you need to do, because you have to find a market fit for your product first. And that takes a lot of time, processes. Sometimes you don't even have the fund to do that. You know, sometimes you have to look for early believers, you have to look for collaborators, you know, and if you don't have people vouching for you, it becomes a problem. So it takes between a year to about 3 years, you know, for you to find at least some footing to say that, look, okay, I'm a startup. It could go as far as 5 years. For social impact investment, it could take, it could take a bit longer, you know, and non-social impact investment like fintechs, you know, they expect within a year that you're already churning out, you know, some kind of revenue or profit. So,
okay, all right, let's talk about poaching. You're laughing. Yes, because a certain time I can recollect, I think it's 2015 or 2018 when Mark Zuckerberg visited Lagos. And when he was going, there were a lot of speculations that he poached.
Yes.
You can confirm that too, right?
Yeah, poaching is a very critical part of the industry. There are people who don't want to invest in building tech skills, who would rather, you know, talking about experienced techies, you know, it's hard to come by. So for techies, you have different level of grading. You have entry-level techies, you have mid-level, and then you have the senior guys, you know.
You're part of the senior guys.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call myself that, but yeah, those are the 3 stages. So those who have money at their disposal would come poach your senior guys. There's no doubt about it. You know, all they need to do is to offer them 2 times what you're offering, and they will jump. They will jump at it. They will jump ship, you know. But some of us, we spend a little bit more time training, you know, entry-level guys. You know, my company, for example, we have an internship program where we recruit entry-level techies, whether it's from the university system or from wherever, even if whether you are a graduate or a non-graduate, as long as you know how to write your first hello world, we would recruit you, you know, and then train you within the tech stack that we use in our company. You know, we know that we encourage them to pick up other jobs, you know, perhaps to make up for what we're paying them, or even take up a full-time job somewhere else. If they have to leave, they can leave. But the beauty about it is that you can work remotely from anywhere. And if you can manage your time properly, you can always contribute even to, you know, the community, your first community that you left. My techies, for example, especially those of, I can tell you, MTN pushed about 3 of them, you know, and some of them, one of them is working with JP Morgan's, the other one is in Canada, you know, but anytime we have a project and we need their level of expertise, contribution in the project, they are always there. You know, so it depends on how you look at it.
So how do I apply? Trust me, I have a lot to offer because I have something doing. I'm a journalist. You just pay me something little.
Yeah, so there's no entry barrier to the tech space. You know, there's no age barrier. There are people who started in their 40s, 50s, 60s. It depends on how committed you are. If you can commit an average of 4 hours a day learning to code, you can be sure that in the next 6 months to 8 months, you should be able to write a decent amount of code.
Okay. I don't want to discourage her, but I ran out after 1 week.
So that I don't drop out.
Yes, I enrolled for coding.
Oh, really?
Yes, when they were saying, oh, tech this, tech that, and I said, I want to be a programmer. 1 week after.
You just
I left. Okay, so I would like to ask about this, you know, just in relation to what she asked about. Technology space is like sports. Catch them young and they do better because it is now that a lot of people are waking up to a lot of things. I could remember in year 2000 they were saying millennium bug and everything. We didn't understand what they meant then. And then curious people were already making use of the internet. They were already understanding a lot of things. By the time we would wake up, let's say 2015, 15 years later, they were already gone. So for the people coming up now, for young Nigerians, for youths, for parents and their children, what would you advise them to, you know, what knowledge would you advise them to really arm their children with, especially in the tech space?
Okay, so tech is eating up everything. So, like we love to say, software is eating up everything. Um, but expose your kids to a lot of things. You know, STEM education, for example, science, tech, engineering, and math. Also expose them to other things, music. Just expose them to everything. You don't know where their interests might lie, where they might pick it up. And there's no harm in having multiple skill sets. You know, there's a correlation in literally everything, from arts to science. You know, there's that correlation. So why not? You know, just give them, just expose them, just let their eyes open, let them see the world for what it is in terms of the opportunities that there are, and let them build interests, whether it's sports, anything. I do that with my kids. I try to expose them to a lot of things, you know, and I keep monitoring them. I put my eyes on them just to see where their interest, you know, lies and grows. So, you know, you can never tell.
So for the young ones out there, what would be your message for them?
Yes.
Going forward that, yeah, we've been complaining the federal government is not doing that, is not doing this. There's something on ground now. That enabling environment is what everybody have been, you know, yearning for. What would be your call for the younger generation?
For the younger generations, I want to say that perhaps there are about two categories of those people, or three. There are those who are privileged, whose parents can afford to give them the best of exposure. There are those who perhaps have a decent education, but perhaps don't have the guidance, and could do well, pretty much well, if they have the same opportunities as the first category. Then there is a third one who perhaps don't even have an education. You know, perhaps somewhere along the line they dropped out of school, secondary school, primary school, I don't know. For the second and the third categories, the beauty about tech is that it is readily available with you. It's right there in your pocket, you know. YouTube, for example. So instead of wasting so much time on YouTube watching videos, or TikTok learning how to do dance videos, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you can learn and pick up one or two skill sets. You know, as an entrepreneur, I'm learning every day. You know, it comes with a job. You're reading every day, you're reading, you're researching, you know, because somewhere along the line you might pivot. Your business might not be doing so well here. Ideation is different from the final product. You know, you start here. It's like, look at the life cycle of a butterfly, for example. You know, that's how it is. So for young people, I would advise that they try to learn new skill sets. They should be very inquisitive and curious. These are high-paying jobs, really. These are high. I've seen someone without a university education, a secondary school graduate, who someone helped him, just send him to ACTtmp4 to go and learn Java. And right now, he's in Canada without a university education. You know, he literally brought his family out of poverty, got a house for his mother, got his younger siblings businesses, education. I know two people like that. I know two people like that. And these two people I'm talking about actually worked with me. So I'm not telling you, it's not a hearsay story. You know, these are people that I know. You know, so I've seen tech transform people's lives. It can do a lot more for our teeming youths, those in the village and all of that. You know, I just wish and I pray that some of us can, you know, give back to our communities by helping set up or build some of the ecosystems within our communities where young people can actually get some of these skill sets and find a good job for themselves. The government cannot do it all. We have to, and that's why I'm happy about this act, really, because yes, the government is beginning to realize or recognize that, you know, ICT contributed over 17% if you look at the last NBS report. So that means there's a lot more if we can invest more, you know, apart from the issue of job creation and all of that. There are issues that we cannot leapfrog ourselves over them. We can't use technology to jump over them. Issue around infrastructure, for example, connecting rural communities to market and all of that. You need roads, you need infrastructures, yeah? But in terms of taking that woman in the village who makes gele and exposing her to a global market, you know, where people in the UK or China perhaps can even buy her gele, that's tech for you. That is technology for you. That's the opportunity. It has made the world this small.
Okay, let's talk about internet connectivity.
Yes.
We know about the 3G, 4G, and now the major operator is about to launch the 5G if they have not launched it. But let us not deny the fact that we still have issue of internet connectivities even in the heart of town. And then startups thrive on internet. They thrive on broadband. And the broadband penetration now, I don't know how many percent it is at the moment, but it is not, underserved areas are still about 30%. So how would startup break even, especially the ones in the rural areas now? How will the underserved areas, how would they be able to break even? Wouldn't that be a challenge to them?
Yeah, so it brings me back to the issue of infrastructure that I just spoke about,
Yeah.
you know, which, like you rightly said, internet connectivity or penetration or broadband access is a very critical factor. Now, let me just take you back a little bit. Let's look at the country as a whole. We have 200 million people, yeah? How many people are banked? About 44% of our people are actually banked. Yeah, so you have over 50% of our people that are still unbanked. And remember that 70% of our population actually work in the agricultural value chain. So from primary production to market access. Yeah, so a lot of these people don't even have financial service, access to financial service to even begin with. They are not in the banking or in the formal. So if you look at our GDP as a whole, you can argue to say that perhaps what we're looking at is just 40% of our population contributing to our GDP. Why? Because there is no data, we don't collect data from the unbanked or the informal sector, so to put it. And for me, working in the agricultural space, that's one of the challenges that I face. You go to a community in a rural place, and in a community of over 100 people, you might find just one or two people with phones, not smartphones, you know, what we call feature phones, yeah? And for you to communicate or reach every other person within that community, you have to go through these two people or one person. So when we're onboarding farmers, we have to now evolve into building a mobile app that would need internet all the time, to building a mobile app that can work offline. So when our agents go to those communities and they onboard farmers, they have to come to where there's internet connection for it to be able to synchronize, you know. And then, of course, the issue of 5G that you mentioned, you're not even dealing with 4G in those communities. You're dealing with like the likes of 3G or 2G, you know. So we have to optimize our application to be able to compress data, both text and images, and send across a 2G network. These are the challenges, you know. But you can't ask a telecom service provider to go and build masks in those communities because the purchasing power there is low. So it's going to be a waste of investment to start with. So unless we find a way, you know, to grow the purchasing power of our people in the informal sector, farmers, for example, it's not going to make any commercial or economic sense for me to go and build a mask as a telecom service provider. So these issues are going to linger for as long as our people remain underproductive and poor.
Are there other challenges you foresee and you would want the federal government to put in place to avoid stories in future?
Well, for issues around this, I think that the government would have to step up a little bit, you know, make this investment devoid of the telecom service providers, and if possible, and I want to hope that the Startup Act is also going to look at certain peculiarities when it comes to this, this kind of challenges that we face, for example, and then look at how, because we are at the digitization phase when you look at the agricultural sector. Yeah, so it means that we have to onboard people, we have to create bank accounts for them, we have to create, perhaps even enroll them on our national register, whether it's NIN or BVN, and all of that, but beyond that, the government would have to support it. They have to look at, let's say, cheaper means, and there are cheaper technologies, actually, ways that we can carry internet to these communities. It doesn't have to be 5G. We're not there yet. 5G means that we were talking about autonomous tractors and the rest of them. In one of my conversations with a leading drone manufacturer in China, when they were telling me that their drone needs internet, I told them, look, where I work, it's not going to fly. You just have to up your game. You have to look at, if you want to penetrate this market, sub-Saharan Africa, you have to find a way to make your drones work offline. Perhaps when we get to where there's internet connection, it can sync. And these are the issues. But there are technologies there where, the government can use abandoned radio mask, for example, television masks, since we're going digital. They can use those masks to actually, drive internet penetration to rural communities, that way aiding and speeding up the process of digitization for our rural players.
A lot of challenges, like you said, this broadband penetration, and currently most of these telecommunication giants are having issues of rights of ways, and even in the underserved areas, when they try to put their masts and their telecom infrastructures there, they still have issues of vandalism and, having to talk to locals to do that. I hope it is being sorted. So lastly, let's talk about patents.
Yes.
Patent in the startup industry is just like the entertainment industry, where you have piracy.
Yes.
Tell us about the challenges of patent and how to avoid your work being, stolen or being duplicated by someone who you just who you just gave an idea, and then the person just stole your work. Patent. Let's talk about that.
So for patent,
yes.
I think it starts from the very basic issues, around your product identity, your company ID, company name, colors, color schemes, and all of that. You start from there, you get that registered. We know that itself is a Herculean task, because the process is very much manual. When you go to Ministry of Trade and Investment, where that's the only office where you can carry out some of these activities. But for the likes of patenting, whether it's for your hardware or your software, trying to show how current or data moves across your software, I think that if you're going international as a startup, in fact, your investors will not even let you. They won't put money in your startup if you don't carry out some of these activities internationally. First they would demand that you perhaps even register your company. That's why you have a lot of our startups as Delaware companies. They are more American startups than they are Nigerian startups. It boils down to all of these issues, and it's one of those things that we're hopeful. And I believe that the Startup Act is going to help us address, looking at the startup portal, which is a critical component in developing the ecosystem. We believe that it's going to address or streamline some of these issues, that we face, because it makes up for all of the troubles, really.
All right, thank you very much, Luna Bauer, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we've heard a lot about startup and the Startup Act, and then we are glad that it's going to birth a lot for not only Nigerians but startups and for the economy. That's a tech advocate there. And before we move on, we'll be moving on straight to politics. But before we move on, we'll go on a quick break. And when we come back, we'll delve straight into politics.
With the